We are going to launch our 10:15 presentation with Peter Wolf, who's the senior strategist at Best Friends Animal Society. He's going to be talking about with friends like these, the unintended consequences of pulling friendly community cats for adoption. Peter Wolf is a senior strategist for the Best Friends Animal Society. Peter's role involves the analysis of science and public policy related to community cat issues, a topic he's been researching and writing about since 2010 through his blog, Vox Felina. His writing is published regularly on the Best Friends blog, in letters to editor, and in peer-reviewed research articles. Peter holds a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and a master's degree in industrial design. His professional industry experience has focused on the acquisition, analysis, and synthesis of quantitative and qualitative data. All right,
so I think probably anyone joining the call is familiar with TNR or TNVR, as it's increasingly being called Trap-Neuter-Vaccinate-Return, and also return to field programs, which again go by different names. Shelter-neuter-return, sometimes it's just called TNR, but it's a shelter doing it instead of the residents in the community. But in any case, all of this has become very well established. And again, probably that is not news to anybody joining us this morning. And this has had some really significant effects. It's reduced the number of cats admitted to shelters. We know that. It's certainly increased the number of cats leaving shelters alive. Again, all good news. And yet still what we know from the latest data from 2021 is there are roughly 2 cats dying in shelters for every dog dying in shelters. So clearly there is still a need to do more, take a closer look at what life-saving programs are available and being implemented for cats in US shelters. One remaining challenge that goes along with this is the concern, and this is often concern among folks who are very supportive of TNR and all its various manifestations. Well-intentioned concerns, I want to be very clear about that. But this concern over returning friendlies can really have disastrous consequences. And this is especially true. We are virtually every part of the country that I'm aware of is right now hearing about shelters at or over capacity. Obviously, this can be a huge issue in these kinds of shelters, especially those, again, high intake over capacity. I want to be really clear at the outset, though. I'm not advocating for a one-size-fits-all policy. These tend to also be disastrous. Again, anyone who was at HSU Expo, if you heard Dr. Heather Kennedy from Casey Pet Project present, she used this phrase that I thought was just brilliant. She mentioned it a few times in her presentation about we're doing the best we can with the information we have at the time, right? Any of those can change, right? So for example, how do we know about where these cats are living, these friendly cats? Who's taking care of them? If we get new information about, wait a minute, this cat's got a dedicated caregiver, that probably changes how we think about their, how do we provide an outcome for them? Are there health issues? What is the shelter's capacity? I just mentioned right now, a lot of the shelters are at capacity. I'm in Phoenix. That's certainly the case here. And again, I'm seeing that on social media from shelters across the country. So again, all these factors are likely going to weigh into this decision. And I'm going to talk in a little bit, well, I'm not going to do a lot of the talking. That's the best part about this presentation, is it's other folks more directly connected to this issue, actually, by way of video clips. But this was an issue that actually came up as I was preparing for Expo. So this would have been April of this year. I heard from a student of mine. I used to teach at Arizona State. I heard from a student, and I'll be clear, I don't know that I've ever heard from a student contacted me out of the blue saying, you know what, I just realized, what an inspiration you were, or what, how you got me excited about design and architecture history, and I never thought I'd be excited. I don't hear from that. Instead, I hear from students who say things like this: we found this friendly black cat in a city park, and again, this is April in Phoenix, middle of the afternoon, it's really hot outside. What should we do? We called the shelter's full, what should we do? So these are the kind of calls I get from students. This was actually this student reaching out by way of Facebook. And what do we know about this cat? Again, I'm going back to Dr. Kennedy's kind of what I've come to think of as kind of this mantra is we're doing the best we can with the information we have at the time. So what information did we have at the time? This cat was clearly friendly. And by the way, what you're seeing here, this was the photo that the student sent me. This was, again, public park, and here's a carrier, brand new carrier, by the way, with a new bed inside and a couple cans of Friskies. So they had like left, whoever left this cat in the park left all these provisions. We don't know the circumstances beyond that, but this cat was friendly, front declawed, no teeth, matted fur, and as far as I could tell, about 100 years old. So clearly, this is not one of the friendly cats who is going to be put back where we found the cat, right? This one needs a different outcome. And thankfully, I was able to get this cat into a rescue where she found a great home right away. So she is living out her retirement years in great comfort and luxury. So happy ending, pretty straightforward. As I said, just given the information we have here, this is not a cat we're certainly not putting back in a public park. But as I say, this is just to sort of ease into a topic where it's not always such an easy decision to, kind of march through this bullet list and say, well, it's clearly this one needs to go into a home. And I want to talk specifically 5 different kind of categories of considerations, starting with the caregivers, the people who care for these cats, which in many communities, it's more than one person. It takes a little detective work sometimes to find all the people caring for the cats, but there's often more than one person. We want to talk about owners. Stacy had a couple questions in there about, has anyone lost a cat? These sorts of programs are actually a great benefit to cat owners who do lose their cats. We'll hear from one of my colleagues talking about that in a little bit. What about shelter staff? When you've got this conveyor belt of cats coming in with no end in sight and you're at or beyond capacity, obviously that takes a toll on shelter staff. What about the other cats? These cats, there's sort of this myth that these cats are very solitary and loners. And again, if you are a caregiver yourself, if you've got more than one cat in your home, you know this, they do have their buddies. Some tend to be solitary, but a lot of them do have their buddies. So we want to take that into consideration. What would happen if we removed a friendly cat from a situation where that cat is also the buddy with one or more cats in that group? And then finally, the community. We want to talk about that last, and I'll get into a little more detail. I don't have a video for that, so I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And with that, I'm going to try to.
Well, I was part of the cat count at the very beginning, and that was really fun. And I thought talking to the locals, it was gonna be more of a barrier than the way they reacted. And it was amazing to see that even in the more rural and more less financial areas, they were very concerned about their cats in their neighborhood, and that was very refreshing to see. A lot of the locals that I met really loved their cats. They saw our t-shirts and thought we were going to pick up their cats. And we started talking about the community cat program, and they were just amazed, like, that is even a thing. And automatically they wanted us to pick one up and take it back to get it spayed and neutered and vaccinated. But they love their cats. They truly do. We think that the community don't care about their animals, and they really do, and it's getting out there to talk to them. There was one lady that I met during the cat count that she had a female cat that was constantly having kittens. We saw kittens in the yard, and we came up and spoke to her. She only spoke Spanish, so I spoke to her directly, and she'd heard about Palm Valley, and her neighbors constantly wanted to call animal control because of all these kittens running around. But she didn't want these kittens to be killed. She thought the animal control is going to pick them up. They're going to go to Palm Valley Animal Center and they're going to get killed. And she wanted the help, and she just didn't know where to go to. And when we started talking to her about the program, she got excited. Like, she got really excited and said, when is it going to start? And a lot of the locals were asking, like, when is it going to start? And it was exciting. A lot of them got very excited. They started telling us, like, well, you need to go to this house, you need to go next door. I actually have 5 here. This one's a male, this one's a female. They started giving us more information. And at first, they're like, oh, who are these people coming around? And we explained the program, and they gave us all the information that we needed to help.
So, as you could see from her title, this is Melissa at the time, and you'll see the same a couple clips from now, is a colleague of hers, Luis. At the time we shot these videos, they were all at Palm Valley Animal Center, which is, if you're not familiar, that's the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, so southern tip of Texas. And again, at the time, I want to say they had dropped below 30,000 annual animal intake. So big shelter, lots of animals coming in, lots of folks. I don't remember the exact percentage living below the poverty level down there. I actually walked some of the neighborhoods with Melissa and some of her colleagues, and was just really astonished. It's exactly as she described. These people love these cats. They didn't necessarily love them having kittens year in and year out, and and seeing all of that and feeling like there was nothing they could do about it. As soon as they heard that there was going to be this program to get these cats sterilized and vaccinated, they were excited about that. But there was this trepidation they had about, well, is Palm Valley Animal Center going to come and take the cats away and they just disappear and we don't see them again? So there was this tension there that you heard Melissa describe, but the overwhelming sentiment that these cats were really valued in the community. And again, it was really cool. I got to experience that firsthand. In fact, the very first slide where there's that photo of me and the little kitten, that was down in Palm Valley. We were walking neighborhoods. And that's when that little kitten toddled up to me. So again, this is kind of the perspective of the caregiver. Now I want to show a video providing the perspective of a pet owner. This is, again, from Palm Valley, from the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. This is Myra describing when her cat Star, who is a senior cat, went missing, and the fact that she was able to be reunited with Star because of this program that Palm Valley had started. I'm going to assume that's a yes.
The way I found out about TNR was, like I said, they trapped, I thought it was 3 cats, outdoor cats. When they came and they're like, can we release the cat that we had trapped a couple of days ago? I figured, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's fine. But I was wondering, like, well, what other cat did they trap? Because I know the cats are linger here in the front. So when the lady came down with that kennel and I saw a white little kitty cat, my God, I fell to my knees, and I have a bad knee. I fell to my knees and I started crying because I've had her since I was 23, and she's an older cat. You might not tell by looking at her, but she's 15, 17 years old already, and I was sad. I was heartbroken because I didn't know she had trapped her, and I had told her that she was my outdoor back cat. I don't know, I wanted to be angry at her, but I understand it's her property. But thankfully this program was in effect and I got my baby back. I was just thinking of all the stuff we've been through, from apartment to apartment to finally living here with my boyfriend in his house. I was just, oh my God, like she's my baby. She's the one that's been with me for the longest time, and luckily TNR brought her back to me. I'm just so happy for that program. Thank you guys so much. I'm sorry. Like, what if she never came back to me? Like, what would her outcome be at the shelter? Or I don't know. Just thinking of the what ifs it's a burden, and it's not good having that what if in the back of your mind. What if What if I would have brought her back in? What if she got along with the boys inside? What if my neighbor actually liked cats? It's just a whole lot of what ifs, and it's not good to think of all that stuff. But luckily, she's back home, and even though she's a little moody, older cat, she's inside. She's happy inside, just getting along with the boys. But I'm happy. I really am happy. This program is, I love it. I'm just so happy this program's here.
Again, as the last two video clips really demonstrated, friendly cats, sociable cats who land in shelters for any number of reasons, could be picked up by field services folks, could be a neighbor in the case of Myra's cat Star. They're friendly for a reason, right? These cats have clearly been socialized, and this cat, Star, was socialized because she is a pet cat and has been Myra's cat for many years. In the case of the cats that Melissa was describing and that I got to see firsthand when I walked the neighborhoods with Melissa and other staff from the shelter, they're social, not because they have owners in any, certainly not in a legal sense, but not even in kind of the traditional sense we think of as ownership. That is, very few people in those neighborhoods would have said, oh yes, that cat is my cat, that cat is our cat. But they were clearly, they had become socialized because they had people who loved them, cared for them, provided what they could provide for them, and should this cat go missing, would have missed that cat terribly, right? So again, that's just something to keep in mind when we're looking at the friendly cat that's come into the shelter. They're friendly for a reason. What's the story? And again, sometimes this requires a little bit of detective work, some door knocking, using door hangers to check out the neighborhood where they came from, to find, wait a minute, is somebody missing their cat? Are there caregivers, known caregivers in the neighborhood who we can check with and just ask, like, hey, we got this, whatever tuxedo cat in, no ear tip, this cat's intact. Do you know what the story is with this cat? So third category I want to talk about, and again, this is Luis from Palm Valley. He and Melissa are both now at Harlingen, which is also in the Rio Grande Valley, smaller community. Harlingen Humane Society is doing amazing work in that community. And Luis is talking about, I believe he refers to them in the video as the dark ages at when he, Melissa, and others were at Palm Valley, when they didn't have any sort of program for cats to get them out alive. And again, I think it's important we think about especially when so many shelters are at or beyond capacity and animals just keep coming in, cats and dogs alike, and it obviously takes a toll. But again, I'll let Luis explain it. He does a much better job than I could.
Before we had TNR, it was a completely different world for our animals, obviously, and for our staff. And TNR hits a special place for me because we just cleared out 2 rooms worth of kennels that were all empty today, and we are consolidating our space, and we're maximizing more kennel space for animals, and now they're all hypothetical animals. They're okay if there's an emergency, if there's a natural disaster, if there's some terrible hoarding case, we now have potentially the space to absorb that instead of not even being able to absorb our normal day-to-day. And one of those rooms, it was a very emotional thing this morning. One of those rooms is our old rescue office, and it's now empty. And it used to be our rescue office, then it turned into a cat room for the last year. It's been almost exactly a year. And now it's empty again, and that's going to be just flex space for any sort of influx of intake. And that room, I've talked about it before, I've written about it before. Every single day, that room, we'd go out to the kennels to try to network some animals, send to our rescue partners, and we'd come back and we'd find 1, 3, 5 different litters of kittens, unweaned, that had just rolled off the truck. And no one else had the ability to bottle feed them, and we didn't really either, but we just made time and stayed late. And so every day we're bottle feeding multiple litters of kittens. And that was every single day, all day, for months, and it was endless. And so a year ago, that's what we were doing. Every day, that was the reality. And at the end of every day, we tried hard to get them into foster. We tried hard to get them out to rescue partners. But at the end of the day, we didn't have staff overnight that could bottle feed. We didn't have the luxury of having some sort of nursery, anything like that. So they would get euthanized. My biggest hope with TNR up and running and making it sustainable, laying the foundation for that sustainability for years to come, my biggest hope is that the gritty and obsessive and exhausted PVAC employee is just a thing of history. I can't wait for the day that our employees are spoiled. I can't wait for complacency to be the problem. I guess, I don't know if it fits, but on a personal level, I was never a cat person. You know, I was never a cat person before I started working at PVAC. I was always a dog person. My family, you know, we grew up with dogs, and that's where I had my emotional attachment to. After just a few months of having to go through what the staff goes through, caring for those cats, and they had no outlet back then, you become a cat person.
All right. Again, this is when Luis was at Palm Valley. He and Melissa are now at Harlingen. Luis is, forget exactly his title, I guess executive director or director, but he's in charge of things at Harlingen Humane Society, and they're doing incredible work. You can hear, you know, from his testimonial, go back just a few years at Palm Valley at this very large shelter at that time, the time he's describing, before they started their working various programs for community cats. At that time, their intake for total animals exceeded 30,000 animals a year. So it really was this conveyor belt coming in with animals, and obviously lots of those were cats. And you can hear again in his voice the toll that this took on shelter staff. And of course, this is not unique to Palm Valley. This is going to be true in shelters across the country. Is when you can't provide outcomes, your back's against the wall. Of course, it's going to take a toll on shelter staff. And again, so it's something to think about when there are going to be those cats, like the black cat that I showed that was left in the park and that we were able to get into a rescue. That's a very different situation, right? To say, okay, well, this one, we need to find a home where this cat can go live out her retirement. That's very different from the cat who, again, is healthy. They meet all the qualifications. They happen also to be friendly, but that could be because this is Myra's Cat Star. It could be because this is one of the community cats that Melissa and I saw in when we went walking the neighborhoods in the RGV. So now, got another video clip here. This is one of my colleagues at Best Friends, Jen Atkins, who her role has since changed, but what she's describing, you'll hear in the video clip, is experience she had when she was actually very much in the trenches with our community cat programs.
Hey, I'm Jennifer Adkins. I used to be the community cat program coordinator for the Idaho Humane Society. And one of the best examples that I can think of when thinking about cats and their community, and not only the humans that they live with, but the other animals that they live with, the other cats, is we had a cat come into our shelter as a stray, was really going to be a great adoption candidate because he was really, really friendly, and we really wanted to find him a new home. But at the time, he was found to have ringworm, and our shelter didn't have the capacity to care for cats that had ringworm. And so I convinced my managers to go ahead and take a leap of faith and return this cat back to his community, even though he was friendly, even though we really wanted to find him a new home. And So we did just that. We put him through the program. We neutered him and gave him his vaccines and his ear tip and brought him back to his neighborhood in a mobile home park. And when we got there, I'm usually used to like residents coming out and wanting to talk to me, especially when it's a friendly cat that's being returned. But what surprised me was the cat was actually met by other cats that started to come out from like underneath other people's houses and cars, and came running up to him. We're so excited to have their buddy back. We're rubbing against him, and truly welcoming him back to the neighborhood. And I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever experienced. And I had a neighbor tell me, that the cat had been there for a while. He was kind of the neighborhood tomcat. Everybody knew him. And so the neighbors had missed him, the residents that lived there certainly missed him, but she also noted that the other cats in the neighborhood had really missed their buddy, and hadn't really been the same since he disappeared and was brought into the shelter. And you could tell that their kind of morale was diminished a bit, and they had been a little bit depressed since their buddy was gone. And so it was really great to see not only the residents at that neighborhood happy that the cat was back, but also to see that the cats were really, really happy to have this like really important member of their family back in their neighborhood. So that's my favorite story about returning a friendly cat back to his home, which is truly it was truly obvious that was his home and he belonged there.
Okay. Again, this just to illustrate, I think one of the points maybe we often, and I include myself when I say we often neglect. Again, we might think about, well, does this cat have an owner like Myra? Is this cat a well cared for community cat like some of the ones that I feed every night that I've TNR'd over the years? I think we forget about this though, that again, these groups of cats have their own dynamics. And again, if we step back a minute, we know this from our own experience having multiple cats in the same household, right? There's some get along better than others. There's some that are, kind of the glue that keeps the whole group together. Everyone's got their role to play. And again, I think we often forget about this when we're considering the return of a friendly cat. The next video clip I'm going to show is, again, this is a former best friend colleague of mine, Amanda, who, similar situation again, like Jen, she was working directly with the folks in the shelter, working with caregivers, and working with the cats in the community.
So I'm here today to tell you about a pretty special cat that used to live in our colony here. His name was Grumpy. He was fondly known as Grumpy because he had that Puss in Boots look. He would look up at you with his big round eyes. He was orange, and then you would go to pet him and he would swat you, bite you, and run away. We often saw that he would choose certain cats to really bond with, and one of the cats that we specifically remember is a little kitten named Callie. So she was probably about 4 months old when we returned her back out here to the colony, and we always worry about how the young ones will do, but there was no fear when we realized that Grumpy in fact took Callie under his wing and he made sure that she was safe. So where there was a Grumpy, there was a Callie, and where there was a Callie, there was a Grumpy, and this went on for many years. And then unfortunately one day we found Grumpy deceased here at the colony, likely of natural causes. He was an old man, but we saw the dynamic change here at the colony. So Grumpy really was the patriarch here, and we started to find Callie by herself, just a complete loner. We worried about her often. The feeders would always say, "Has anyone seen Callie?" Because she kind of lost her being out here, and that was Grumpy. He held this whole place together. And so although Grumpy left on his own terms, per se, removing cats from colonies, I mean, we saw the detriment that it caused here.
So I love this video clip for so many reasons, not least of which is the cat safari going on in the background while Amanda's trying to shoot this obviously pretty serious selfie video for us. But again, what she's describing, I think, is something we forget. Same thing that Jen described is these cats have not just their people, these cats have their cat buddies. And again, it's something to think about when we're thinking about how do we provide the best outcome for this particular cat in front of us. And especially when the cat come in front of us, and talking about a shelter or rescue environment, happens to be a friendly cat. The last consideration I want to talk about, and I don't have a video clip for this, we need to get one or two. It's something that's only received kind of any attention really just recently, and this is this notion of what I describe here as equity. We can call it lots of different things, but this notion that, and again, if anyone's worked at a shelter or in a rescue environment, it would be no surprise to know that the cats tend to come from, excuse me, particular hotspots in whatever community you're working in, right? Often these hotspots tend to be underserved, less affluent communities, communities of color, right? And we have to, I think, again, very little attention has been paid to this, but I think we have to pay more attention to the idea that, and this is true of dogs as well, but cats are being moved from these communities, being adopted into less diverse, more affluent communities. And there's a paper published, I don't remember if this was early 2022 or late 2021. And if anyone wants this, I can, just contact me, peterw@bestfriends.org, and I can send you the paper or send you the link to the paper, whatever. In this case, they were talking about cats and dogs, and I believe this was owner surrender. I don't believe this. Yes, it says right in the title, owner surrender. This was not strays. I would love to see the same study repeated with stray cat intakes, but this was done in Vancouver, and they used some really pretty interesting research methods to sort this out. But again, what they found and backed up with data was what I think we've all kind of known anecdotally for years is, again, these animals are coming from communities that are less affluent and less white, for lack of a better way to put it, than the communities are being adopted into. Now, I want to be really clear about this. That's not necessarily to say that's inherently a bad thing. It's problematic, though, when no one's checking with the communities they're coming from necessarily. They're just moving from those communities into their adoptive homes. And again, there's a lot of unanswered questions. There's I could only find this research paper that actually addressed the issue directly. But the fact that it's now on our radar, I think, is really, really important. So this is good news. It does, admittedly, it does kind of complicate the how do we think about this cat in front of us. Again, Dr. Kennedy's mantra about, doing the best we can with the information we have at the time. Well, if we know where this cat came from in the community, that should probably factor in to this equation as well.
And we do have questions. So I'm going to ask some of the questions here. So of course, everybody's got some specific questions about, was Star, when she came in, was she spayed and neutered already, or was she not at 15 years old?
That's a good question. I'm quite certain that she was spayed, but no collar, no chip. So not able to be identified, but yes, she was fixed.
And one interesting theme that I think I've been hearing throughout your presentation today, which is check with the community, checking with the community. And in your flow chart of how this is happening, I hear it happening almost after the fact rather than before the fact, before the trapping is happening, or before, you know, folks are coming into the community or accepting cats from that part of the community. Do you feel that there's more of this, like after the fact, after the cat has been trapped, we're running around and saying, oh, does anybody own this cat? Or what can we be doing that maybe would happen earlier? I think there's this feeling that I think we should check with the community, or we're going to be trapping this weekend, you know, flyers, get your cats in the house. And I mean, I think with Star, she's now decided to keep her cat indoors as a resolution, sounds like, with a neighbor conflict. So is there, in our process of how we're talking about these programs, maybe is it better to think about doing that community announcement before the fact?
Absolutely. Yeah, you hit on such an important point. I think, and depends on the community / shelter right now, how much is proactive and how much is reactive. And like virtually all things, like the reactive is more stressful, takes more time, it probably costs more money, like there's all kinds of reasons not to do it that way. If you like, that's probably where you have to start if you haven't been doing these programs. But once you kind of start doing them, yes, ideally, you're putting up flyers when you're trapping, you're integrating microchipping, and so get fewer cats without identification coming in to the shelter. And again, the community component is so important. And again, Melissa kind of alluded to that when she was talking about, like, as soon as people heard there was a program, they're just like, can you, here's my cat, can you, like, I want to be the first to get my cat enrolled in this program. They're really eager to have it. And what I kind of imagine, and again, various shelters and communities are at different places, but I think what would be the ideal is whoever, I mean, first of all, ideally, you have one or more dedicated community cat program coordinators. It doesn't become somebody's part-time job to go do detective work, right? You've got one or more staff dedicated to this, and they have, I'm going to date myself by calling it a Rolodex, but they have in their phone that, and they know if this cat came from Central and Missouri in Phoenix, call Peter, because I know he's got cats he cares for there. He's done a bunch of, like, are you missing? Who else who don't we have in our Rolodex yet? And there is this network that allows for that sort of lots of preemptive work, right? Put out, let everyone know we're trapping Tuesday evening or whatever. But also when you do have to react to something and say, well, we know where the cat came from, call these 3 people. If they don't know, nobody knows, right? And really building in, connecting shelter to community, which again, some folks are there, others are just starting on that.
And the organizations that you looked at for this project and that you are in touch with just on an ongoing basis with your job, do they also offer affordable, accessible spay-neuter programs for owned cats in addition to this RTF programs?
That is increasingly, well, on the one hand, increasingly, I think, again, folks are recognizing the importance of that. Is, you can't step around this cat to catch the other, and you're like, well, we're going to leave this time bomb out in the community because this one's got a collar or whatever. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, right now, what I'm hearing that's really concerning is because of the shortage of veterinary professionals across the country, there's a lot of folks who are shutting down their public-facing clinics, or if not shutting down, restricting access to, and because they're having to weigh this out and say, well, we've got all these adoption candidates who we have to spay, neuter, vaccinate before they're adopted. And if that's all the bandwidth we've got, the only thing to cut is the public-facing, days of the clinic or whatever. So there's, again, on the one hand, a recognition of the importance, and on the other hand, it's a real struggle right now. And again, that's not, I don't think that's news to probably anyone on the call is, and again, it's worrying because we've been on calls where we've talked about this. A cat is a cat, like, oh, this one's owned, this one's about half owned, whatever. It's like, you know what, reproductive biology doesn't much care about, whether the cat's got a collar or a microchip, right?
Well, and it's going to come in a carrier or a trap, really is going to be the difference too. And it'll be potentially less labor to come in the carrier as an owned cat rather than in a trap that's been trapped with a paid staff member and, transported and then returned back. And then as you see all the research going on. So, a community sourced spay neuter versus I don't know, how do I say it? A community cat coordinator sourced one may have a more effective cost per unit. I hate to say it that way, but you may be able to do more from a cost standpoint. Again, veterinarians will and technicians and those resources will also determine the load that can be taken into the clinic too.
Well, and again, you and I have talked about this a little bit before. When you're back home in New England, there are parts of New England where there are kitten-free zones, right? And there's a number of factors that play into that, but one of them is literally generations of spay-neuter messaging combined with resources, not just finger wagging, right? It's combined with resources. And I'm not, there's several of us that share this same concern is given the circumstances right now, are we losing ground? I mean, for years, the number of animals, cats and dogs alike, but spay kept increasing, and it's creeping along, increasing. Are we at a point now where we're going to start to see, and again, depending where you are, certainly where I am, 2 litters a year is not uncommon in warmer climates. Like the math absolutely works against us. So we'd only have to lose a little bit of ground before we really start feeling that. And again, doesn't matter owned or unowned from a reproductive biology standpoint.
Going into the Palm Valley interview, a couple of questions in there. Do you have we're on that whole spay neuter challenging theme here. Do you know how their spay neuter program was funded?
So when we shot those videos, that was Best Friends had a significant presence there. And I believe they've also received funding from Maddie's. I mean, they got a significant infusion of funding and desperately needed it. I mean, they were really drowning down there. So that was a big part of it. The funding again is always a little tricky. I think and again, it's a bigger conversation. And again, anyone can contact me or they can through you can find me, whatever. And the paper I'm going to refer to where they talk about the economics of removing cats versus getting them spayed and neutered. And the bottom line is if you do it with enough intensity over enough duration, it's actually economically advantageous. And so there's an argument to be made to policymakers to say, again, we all know this, right? With any sort of management around our house, I mean, talk about whatever, taking care of your home, your car, your community, preemptive stuff tends to be less expensive than if you let stuff break, right? So if you let the system break and you say, well, they just keep coming in, guess what? That's expensive. And there's this whole other component about staff turnover, which, I mean, taking out the human element, like it just chews people up because it's really, really difficult work. That's an argument to be made for, again, to the folks holding the purse strings is that's really expensive in a government shelter. Staff turnover costs a ton of money. Wouldn't you rather have programming that protects them from this kind of suffering, the kind that Luis described?
All right. Yeah, and I mean, spay neuter funding is certainly something that I'm happy to talk with folks about too, because there are challenges, and I think that we have to look more regionally for funding too, locally to get support from local communities, and it really be kind of creative to get support. I know we did that in New England when we lost some of the funding from the larger organizations. We then went local and tried to, but that's, it's collaboration, working together too. We were trying to share resources, and so that the funding was going to go to multiple providers, not just one organization. So anyway, but happy to brainstorm on those types of ideas too. Let's talk a bit about disease. So, I'm very familiar with Massachusetts, and they have a listing of certain kinds of diseases that they would, look at with some concern, I guess, if you were returning a cat back to a colony. Feline leukemia. In the case of the video, you were talking about ringworm. There's FIV too. Some organizations may not, or the state veterinarians might not be too excited to hear that those cats are being returned back to the colonies. So in this story, do you know, did they treat the cat and then return the cat, or what was the thinking around the disease issue?
So specifically with regard to ringworm, and again, I defer to Dr. Heather Kennedy at KC Pet. Like, she will say, I think the term she often uses is self-limiting. Like, and again, it's what are we able to provide? If you have, if you're one of these shelters who has the luxury of, we've got the kitten nursery, we've got this great foster network, including folks who will foster ringworm kittens and all the rest of it. Great, that's probably a really good outlet for those guys. If you don't, if the option is the only way you're getting out the front door is to go back with your ringworm to your friends, or like that's it, that's all we got for you right now, then the decision maybe is pretty straightforward. And again, it is self-limiting. Now the FIV, FELV, most folks in the country stopped testing for that years ago. Certainly Best Friends recommends, like, do not, unless it's a very specific diagnostic, and there's been some recent webinars from Julie Levy and some of her colleagues about, okay, based on what we know, here's again kind of a triage how we can think about these things. And those are very different. FELV, much more infectious. FIV tends to be spread males fighting as a result of mating behavior. In either case, getting the cat sterilized is the best way to interrupt that transmission mode. So FELV, leukemia, tends to be passed mom to kittens. Obviously, if mom is then spayed, you eliminate that transmission route. Similarly, for the boys, FIV, again, the big, bobblehead tomcats that seemingly, once they're fixed, they all turn into mush balls. I don't know why. So again, that's often the best we can do in terms of disease transmission. And especially with leukemia, you're putting them back out anyhow. So you say you did do the testing and you said, okay, they're negative, so we can put them back. You're putting them in the community anyhow. Now, what I've seen, I mean, I don't have them tested, but there's been a couple instances where you say, there's been a couple FELV positive cats. You know this only because their health was deteriorating, and so you did test, coming from the same location. So you think, okay, clearly this is, a bit of a hot spot for that. So you can keep an eye on things. But again, new cats coming in don't necessarily, and there's a window there too. Like, if they're really young, they're obviously susceptible. If they're older, they're susceptible. And if they kind of make it through that young phase, they can live for years and years. And again, it depends if you're talking about, these are cats I feed on my patio. I see them nightly with a wildlife camera. I can monitor their health. That's very different from, this is a group of cat that lives kind of behind the Walmart. And they've got a caregiver, but they're in and out every night or whatever. So I'm not sure that was a very good answer, but again, it comes back to that, what's the information we have in front of us at the time, right?
What's possible. Also, I've seen various different cases of disease too, right? So it's, how is the cat being presented? Diseases like ringworm and others, cats can develop, resolve the issue on their own and yes, over time. So that situation might just be, let's put them back, maybe drop off some supportive wet food, maybe some supplements or something like that. But let Mother Nature, take its course, and have the cat, have that issue resolved. And then we do have Online Feline Leukemia Day, which talks about sort of the issues around feline leukemia and whether it's okay to return cats and the whole testing issue. So if folks are interested in that, they can certainly find out more about that. All right, I'm going to talk. We got a couple more minutes left here. So behavior within the colony, balancing acts, pecking orders, those kinds of things. So one of the videos, talked about the big tomcat, and then after he passed away, the other cat was really not the same behaviorally. I certainly ran into that in Newburyport when our colonies were aging out and one cat would pass away and the partner cat was left behind and get depressed. And I swear we had a committee of 15 people deciding what was going to happen with that cat, right? And so, you know, meetings after meetings there over the years deciding how best to handle the situation. So there's that side where there's this period of loss and reduction, but then there's also a period where, say, there's a bully cat also in the community. I mean, I feel like we need feline behaviorists to be able to sort of help with the triage and the balancing act. I mean, have you run into situations in the colonies that you've been a part of, and how do you make decisions as to sort of what's the next step for that group if it doesn't seem to be in a balanced situation?
Yeah, I think so. In my admittedly limited experience with that, obviously, you know, the first thing is everybody's sterilized, right? So that already tends to, especially for the big tomcats, right? Like that tends to lower the overall temperature, but there can still be bullying. I mean, I've got a group that I recently handed over to neighbors, and the one neighbor in particular, I mean, she admits she's a dog person. I was like, yes, I can tell you're a dog person, because she's talking about like, well, I can't leave the food out there because the orange one, who I call Meatball because he's a big meatball, he'll show up and chase the other ones away. And I was like, well, but I've been feeding at that same location for years, and yes, it's true. And when the other ones see Meatball coming, they just give me, you know, fine, you're first to the dishes, that's fine. And there's enough for all of us. Where I think that I mean, it's definitely a luxury. I'm in a position where I can provide enough food for everybody, and I don't have raccoons showing up. I don't have, like, none of those issues that would warrant, you know, put it down for 30 minutes and then pull it. And that's when people get really concerned, is like the shy one's never going to get theirs because just when they were about to come out from hiding, you pulled the food, or it ran out, everyone ate and they didn't get to eat. I think that's a much trickier. I mean, at that point, were this situation to kind of get to that boiling point, I would try to split it up, even if it's the same physical property, same yard, but opposite sides. And it's all right, fine, you know, Meatball, you're eating right up front here with everybody, and you just march in and everyone gives you a wide berth, and the shy ones are going to stay over here behind the bushes or whatever. But yeah, it's a concern. Again, it's you know, talk about the dynamic. It's adorable when they come out and they've got their tails intertwined and they're all, you know, cute, and they make, and then you get the thug that's in there, and you just think like, God, he's been fixed, and like we've done everything we can, and he's just a jerk. He's just, you know, usually he, not always. I mean, I've seen the little tortoiseshells like who run the block as well. So I mean, it's a challenge, and again, I think that's where it comes back to the idea of, from a shelter or rescue perspective, the better your relationship with the caregivers, the folks in the trenches, the better your intel is about the, right? You can imagine if whatever, Meatball just lands in the shelter and they know where the cat came from and that's all they know, what do you do with that? Versus, we know where they came from, call so-and-so and she can give the whole, usually, yeah, that's the bully. Okay, again, we've got new information. We can make maybe different decisions about what's the best outcome here.
Yep, for sure. I had a cat in my backyard who, at that point in time, my cats were indoor, outdoor, and whenever my cats went out, he'd beat up on them, he'd pee all over them. Yes, very humiliating. My poor cats never forgave me for that. And we called him Tange, so big orange jowly boy, right? And got him neutered, and I eventually brought him in the house, and I had to basically teach everybody how to get along. And the food was very far apart. It took a long time to bring it together, but they eventually did find a way to come to some peace. So I agree 100% on almost thinking of it as an outdoor room and trying to get everybody acclimated together with regards to that. You know, you talked about TNVR a lot. Some people use the acronym TNRM, and we've talked a lot about those M issues, management, understanding the community, getting information from the community, resources. Do you feel that we still capture the essence of that M, or are we kind of losing touch with that?
I have mixed feelings about that, in part because in at least some of the context where the M is explicit in there, I think it's done not in good faith. That is, it's trying to be legislated, and that meaning caregivers need to be identified, that information is on file, they need to register, like all these things that we know are likely to have a chilling effect. In principle, though, absolutely, right? And again, we know from the various studies where they've looked at body condition, large, tens of thousands of cats, and more than 99% of them were in good condition. Actually, in often cases better than our house cats, who tend to be a little bit overweight and whatever. So that indicates to us, like, these cats are managed, they are cared for in the community. We just don't know who's doing it in a lot of cases, but they're not, again, the kind of mythical, shabby, scrappy, mangy, alley cat coming in, where yes, that happens, but the fact that these guys typically look so good says someone's caring for them, and a whole lot of them are friendly. But it's not, again, that's where having that connection between shelters and rescues and the community, building up that network, that Rolodex, to say, now we know who these people are, but we're not necessarily going to write it into our law to say that these guys need to be registered and microchipped back to them and all the rest of it. That's the only part I get nervous about. But in terms of management, again, it's like I can't even manage my own cats in my house, but I guess I'm managing the outside cats every night with help from neighbors. So in principle, absolutely. And again, there's nothing like being able to connect with others doing it. Again, a new one shows up or something, or saying like, how the heck did this ear-tipped cat show up with my group of cats? Like, how did they get the memo? I want to be able to talk to neighbors and say, is anyone, and because they do move on. Maybe there was a bully there or whatever the circumstances. So yes, a network of managers, as it were, absolutely essential, especially if we want to scale this up, right? And to really do best by the cats, do best by the neighbors, all stakeholders concerned.
One thing I'll mention quickly too, you also have used the word neighbors quite a lot, talking with your neighbors, getting out there and being in person. And I almost think that Facebook has hurt us, because yes, we feel like, oh, we'll just post on Facebook and that's where we're going to post information. One person's asking, how do we know if there's a friendly cat that's been dumped at one of the colonies? Oh, we'll just post the cat's picture up on Facebook and it'll determine. And it's given us the pass. It's like the hall pass to say, oh, no, you don't have to talk to your neighbor next door. You don't have to talk to your neighbor across the street. And I get it. There's stresses. There can be baggage. There can be safety concerns. There can be other kinds of issues. So I certainly understand that there are unique situations, but I also think that the best information is the information that your neighbors have.
100%, absolutely. And I can tell you just quickly, and this, it was using an app. It wasn't actually verbal, not face-to-face, but using the Nextdoor app. A neighbor of mine and we keep eyes on the cat. She's got a Ring doorbell, and we've been talking back and forth, again, virtually for years. One of my other neighbor's cats escaped earlier this week. First thing I did was let her know, hey, keep an eye out. She sends me a picture from her Ring doorbell. She's like, he's hanging out here at night. Come on over and get him. And that neighbor did happen to get him, because the cat returned home. By the way, no litter box put outside. Cat returned home on his own, but just in a matter of, I don't know, an hour or so, we were coordinating, like, everyone who's got a camera, keep your eye out for this cat. He's friendly. He's probably not going far, but he's, his dad's worried about him. So there was a case of, without that, to be able to immediately reach out, and the neighbor who lost him, he puts up on our community mailboxes, he puts a little handwritten note. So he was essentially doing the same thing. Yeah, you put it on Facebook and you're like, oh, congratulations, your family in New York now knows your cat's missing. Like,
Right. Right.
That your neighbors 2 doors down are the ones who need to know.
For sure, for sure. And if you do have a cat that is new and friendly and you want to find out whether that cat is owned or not, I'm a huge fan of the paper collar game. So of putting a paper collar on the cat, just saying, call me if somebody owns me, and do it for a week or so, and just to give the cat some time to be able to go home. I'm a huge fan of that as an option. If a cat's friendly, you should be able to get a paper collar on that cat. So, and folks are interested, there's a Mass Animal Fund has a flow chart, a lost cat, found cat flow chart in there for you to go through to do the different things to be able to determine whether as we talked about pathways, that's kind of a pathway chart, and where you can go, what you can do just to try and ensure that you're not pulling somebody's cat off the street or something like that. So
it's such a brilliant answer, in part because it's inexpensive, but also if you're doing that as a shelter or rescue, like you're doing multiples, guess what? You're building up that network too, because someone's going to call, even if they say, like, I've seen the cat here too. I don't know, I can't help you. I don't know anything. Well, now you've got a contact in the neighborhood.
Right. Exactly. All right. So it is 11:15. Thank you so much, Peter. This was a fantastic presentation. And Julie, I will get a link to that chart for the group. I'll put it out in the chat during the course of this morning. Great questions, everybody. Excellent. Great questions. Donna, I will make sure we get that question. I'm not sure we can answer it. Donna was wondering how Star got returned back. It sounds like it was just the community cat person was asking questions, and the lady said she was missing Star.
I believe that's, yeah, I believe so. Yeah. Yeah, we had a lot of folks knocking on doors and putting up door hangers. Yeah.
Super. Excellent. Peter, thank you. Really appreciate it. Great presentation. We're going to go on a break.